The rain had fallen all night, mixing with sleet and snow, washing over the small town of Pinecrest until it was nothing but a blur of white and gray. In the cab of a beat-up Ford truck parked at the edge of a forgotten logging road, Mason Reed stirred awake to the rasp of wind against the window and the gentle pressure of Scout's paw on his chest. His breath fogged the glass, momentarily obscuring the world outside, a world that had stopped making sense to him long ago. Scout lifted his head and let out a low, comforting sound, as if checking that his partner was still there, still breathing. The German shepherd's eyes reflected what little light filtered through the clouded windshield, two amber points in the darkness of the cab. Mason reached out, fingers finding the familiar scar on Scout's right flank, a jagged reminder of shrapnel from Afghanistan, 2013. His own matching scar throbbed beneath the sleeve of his worn army jacket. The cold had settled deep in Mason's bones, making his back ache from another night of sleeping half upright. 3 months living out of his truck had taught him the art of discomfort, how to fold his 6-foot frame into spaces meant for storage, how to wash in gas station bathrooms, how to make instant coffee using melted snow. The Army had taught him to survive. Civilian life had taught him that sometimes survival was all you got. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a wrinkled envelope, the paper worn thin from repeated handling. The foreclosure notice. Final eviction confirmed. Property repossessed. The words felt like epitaphs for a life that had been dying by inches since he'd returned home. The divorce papers had come first, then the medical bills, then the drinking, then the nightmares that wouldn't stop. By the time he'd gotten his head above water, there was no water left, just a drought of opportunity and a bank account that had finally reached its bottom, $173. Mason folded the letter and slipped it under the seat. "We're officially homeless, Scout. Guess that makes us free men." Scout's ears perked up, one twitching as if he understood the grim joke. Mason turned the key in the ignition, and the truck coughed reluctantly to life, the heater sputtering warm air that smelled faintly of burning dust. Outside, the world was transforming. What had been rain in the valley had become heavy snow in the higher elevations, great thick flakes that muted the sound of the engine and blanketed the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. He pulled onto the main highway that cut through Oregon's high country, where mist rolled down from pine-covered ridges and the mountains rose like sentinels, their peaks lost in clouds. For most people, that kind of vastness inspired peace. For Mason, it was a trap, too much like the Hindu Kush, where emptiness could hide enemies and silence preceded ambush. Every sudden sound, a branch snapping under the weight of snow, a passing logging truck, flashed him back to sirens and shouted orders. The nights were worse. He'd jerk awake to the phantom smell of dust and diesel, to the echo of his sergeant's voice shouting over mortar fire. And always Scout was there, leaning his warm weight against Mason's side, grounding him back to the present. The dog had been there for the worst of it, both in the war and after. When Mason couldn't remember why he should keep breathing, Scout had a way of reminding him. A nudge, a whine, the simple need to be fed and walked. Responsibility was an anchor. Mason stopped at a roadside diner that advertised all-day breakfast in flickering neon, the kind of place that smelled of burnt coffee and decades of griddle grease. Inside, the vinyl booths were cracked, and the menus were laminated relics from another era. A waitress with steel gray hair twisted into a practical bun eyed his uniform jacket as he slid into a booth by the window. Scout waited outside, curled against the tire of the truck, his breath visible in small clouds. The coffee came in a mug that had seen too many customers, but it was hot and strong, and that was enough. Mason warmed his hands around it, feeling the ache in his fingers begin to subside. He could make the coffee last, nurse it for an hour maybe, before the social contract of occupied tables and unpaid checks would force him back into the cold. "You military?" The waitress's voice cut through his thoughts, her hand already tipping the pot to refill a cup he'd barely touched. Mason nodded once, not looking up. "My boy served, Iraq, 2 tours." She set a plate of toast in front of him, though he hadn't ordered it. "On the house. It's too cold out there to run on empty." The unexpected kindness tightened something in his chest that he'd been working hard to keep numb. "Thank you, ma'am." She nodded toward a rack of local papers and flyers near the register. Help wanted sections slim this time of year, but you never know. Sometimes luck finds you when you stop looking. Mason wasn't sure about luck, but he was running short on options. After she moved on to other customers, he picked up one of the papers and flipped through it mechanically, scanning for anything that might convert to cash in hand. Most of the jobs required certifications he didn't have or experience in industries that had never intersected with his life. Near the back, a small classified caught his eye. The text so faded it might have been placed months ago. Abandoned mountain estate for sale. 100 must sign waiver. Property as is. An address followed, Rosario Peak Road, along with a county office number. Mason read it twice, convinced he'd missed something. $100 for any kind of property was either a scam or a death trap. Probably both. I see you found our haunted house special. The waitress had returned, coffee pot still in hand. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. That bad, huh? Honey, that place has been sitting empty since the 80s. The old Blackwood estate. People say it's cursed. The feds raided it back in the day. Something about the military using it as a cover site. She lowered her voice. People went missing up there. They say at night you can still hear, let me guess, screams, chains rattling? Mason's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile on someone else's face. The waitress shrugged. I was going to say the wind, but believe what you want. That place has eaten up 3 real estate companies. No one will touch it, so the county's been sitting on it for years. Tax burden, I guess. Mason folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. A roof's a roof. Outside, Scout was waiting patiently, his fur collecting snowflakes that melted into tiny stars of water. Mason crouched beside him, feeling the cold seep through the knees of his jeans. What do you think, partner? Haunted house or easy shelter? Scout gave a small wag of his tail, amber eyes fixed on Mason's face with the steady trust that had survived gunfire and nightmares. Mason stood, brushing snow from his hands. Then we'll take a look. He filled the truck's gas tank with what remained of his copain and drove north toward the mountains. The road wound higher, the air thinning, the snow falling heavier with each mile of elevation gained. The radio faded to static and then to silence, leaving only the rhythmic thump of wipers against the windshield and the growl of an engine that protested the climb. At a crossroads, a rusted sign pointed west. Rosario Peak RD, the same address from the ad. Mason turned, and the truck's tires slipped briefly before finding purchase. The pavement quickly gave way to gravel, then to a rutted Forest Service road barely wide enough for his vehicle. Pines crowded close on both sides, their branches heavy with snow, creating a natural tunnel that seemed to swallow them whole. Scout pressed his nose to the window, muscles tense beneath his fur, fully alert now. After nearly an hour of slow progress, fighting the increasingly treacherous conditions, the trees finally parted to reveal iron gates standing crooked on stone pillars. The words on the archway were almost illegible beneath decades of weather and neglect. Blackwood Estate. Beyond the gates, partially obscured by swirling snow, a massive structure loomed against the white sky. 3 stories of dark stone, windows boarded or broken, a once grand entrance now sagging like a mouth frozen in a grimace. Even from inside the truck, Mason could feel the weight of its silence, the sense of something long abandoned, yet not quite empty. He killed the engine and stepped out, the cold hitting him like a physical blow. The air smelled of wet earth and ice, with an undertone of decay that seemed to emanate from the house itself. Scout trotted ahead, tail low, ears pricked forward, every line of his body communicating caution. The gravel crunched under Mason's boots as he approached the gate. A city seal hung from a broken chain, the official notice of seizure faded but still visible. He pulled out his phone, no service, as expected. The isolation was complete. A county car appeared behind him, having followed his tracks up the mountain. The man who emerged wore a cheap raincoat over a rumpled suit, a clipboard clutched in gloved hands. His face was red from the cold, his expression skeptical as he sized up Mason and the truck. "You're Reed? The guy who called about the Blackwood place?" Mason nodded, extending a hand that the official regarded briefly before giving it a perfunctory shake. "Gotta say, you're the first taker we've had in years. Most folks hear the stories and keep driving. I've slept in worse places. The official's eyebrows rose slightly. You a vet? Afghanistan, 3 tours. Something shifted in the man's expression. Not quite respect, but a reassessment. Well, I've got the paperwork here. The county's selling as is, which means no inspections, no guarantees, no refunds. You're buying at your own risk. Mason took the clipboard, scanning the document. What's the catch? $100 for this much property doesn't add up. The catch is the place is a money pit. Probably needs a complete teardown. Plus there's the history. The official stamped his feet against the cold, looking up at the mansion with undisguised distaste. Military used it for some hush-hush program back in the day. There was a raid, an investigation. Records are sealed, but rumors aren't. No one's lasted more than a night up here. Locals swear it's haunted. Mason signed his name without hesitation, the pen leaving a scratchy trail across the damp paper. Haunted by what? Bad memories or actual ghosts? The official shrugged, taking back the clipboard and exchanging it for a set of iron keys that looked better suited to a medieval dungeon than a modern property. Just remember, you own whatever's inside, including the ghosts. He forced a laugh that died quickly in the thickening snow, then retreated to his car without further ceremony. Mason watched the taillights disappear down the mountain, leaving him alone with Scout in a house that had been waiting for someone to claim it for longer than Mason had been alive. As the truck rolled past the gates, the sound of the world seemed to fade, muffled by snow and distance and the peculiar acoustics of abandoned places. The driveway twisted through what might once have been formal gardens, now overgrown and buried under white. Rusted iron fences marked boundaries that nature had long since reclaimed. The house stood before them, massive and scarred. Snow had drifted against the stone walls and collected in the broken windowsills, transforming ruins into something almost beautiful. Mason parked, shut off the engine, and sat for a moment, staring at what $100 had bought him. A gamble, a shelter, a mystery, or maybe just another mistake in a long line of them. Scout pressed against his side, warm and solid, the only constant in a world that kept shifting beneath Mason's feet. Well, Scout, home sweet home. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the particular stillness of places long uninhabited. Mason's flashlight beam cut through decades of darkness, glinting off broken glass and revealing walls marked with bullet holes partially concealed beneath peeling wallpaper. Water damage had left dark stains across ornate ceilings, and what furniture remained stood like forgotten centuries, draped in sheets gone gray with time. Scout padded beside him, sniffing cautiously, muscles tensed beneath his fur. His claws clicked softly against marble floors that might once have been magnificent, but were now cracked and dulled. Somewhere deep within the house, a door creaked, the sound echoing like a sigh through empty corridors. Mason exhaled slowly. Relax, soldier. To Scout or to himself, he wasn't sure which. They found the grand hall, a vast space with a sweeping staircase that curved up to the second floor. A chandelier hung precariously from a single chain, its crystals festooned with cobwebs that shimmered in the flashlight beam like frost. The roof seemed intact here, though water had found its way in through other parts of the house, leaving pools that had long since frozen into cloudy ice. Mason set down his pack and unrolled his sleeping bag near a massive fireplace. The hearth was big enough to stand in, blackened from decades of fires, though it showed no signs of recent use. He collected broken pieces of furniture, a chair leg here, a drawer there, and arranged them in the grate. A small flame caught, then grew, casting dancing shadows across the walls and providing the first real warmth the room had known in years. Scout circled 3 times before settling on the sleeping bag, head on paws, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight's reach. Mason sat against the wall, knees drawn up, watching the flames. Outside, the snow continued to fall, sealing them into their refuge, one flake at a time. We made it another day, he said softly, not expecting or needing a response. That's all we need to do. The flashlight dimmed, then went out, battery succumbing to the cold. In the silence that followed, the house seemed to exhale around them. Somewhere behind the walls, a faint metallic tap echoed once, then stopped. Mason froze, listening. Scout's ears twitched, but he didn't growl. Mason let his head fall back against the cold stone and whispered, "Just the wind." But part of him knew better. The wind outside shifted, carrying the scent of snow and pine through the broken windows. The soldier and his dog sat together in the darkness, two survivors clinging to whatever pieces of peace they could still find. When sleep finally came, it was restless and shallow, and beneath it, deep in the bones of the old house, something waited, listening, remembering. Morning crept in slow and pale, filtering through cracked shutters and swirling dust motes that danced like old ghosts in the light. Mason woke to the sound of Scout stretching beside him, nails clicking softly against the marble floor. The fire had died to embers that gave off more memory of heat than actual warmth. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the silence that followed felt heavier somehow, the way silence always did after an attack, when you weren't sure if it was truly over. He brewed instant coffee on a small camping stove, the bitter scent cutting through the damp air. Scout sat close, eyes fixed on him, tail sweeping the dusty floor in a slow arc. Mason looked around the grand hall, seeing it properly in daylight, the staircase curling upward into shadow, the faded murals on the walls depicting hunting scenes and landscapes that no longer existed, the marble floor inlaid with a pattern that might once have been a family crest. "Place has seen better days," he murmured, voice echoing off the walls and returning to him smaller, lonelier. He explored the ground floor first, flashlight in one hand, coffee in the other. A long corridor stretched ahead, lined with closed doors swollen from moisture. The wallpaper peeled in long curls, revealing the faint outlines of bullet holes underneath. Military-grade ammunition, not civilian, the kind meant to punch through body armor. Mason recognized the signature all too well. A newspaper from 1987 lay half-buried in dust by the stairs, its headline faded beyond recognition. The air inside the mansion felt stale, thick with the weight of years. Yet beneath that there was something else, an undertone that felt almost human. Not danger exactly, but memory. The sense that the walls had absorbed the echoes of whatever had happened here and held them like a record waiting to be played. Scout trotted ahead, nose twitching, tail stiff. He stopped at the threshold of what used to be a study. Shelves sagged under the weight of moldy books, and a massive oak desk sat in the center, drawers half open as if someone had left in a hurry. Mason crouched beside it, brushing away grime from a tarnished nameplate. The engraved letters were faint but still readable. General V. Blackwood. The rumors were true then. The mansion had belonged to someone in the military, someone high-ranking, but that wasn't what sent a chill up Mason's spine. What unsettled him was the sudden, inexplicable sense of familiarity, as if he'd seen this room before, this desk, this name. Behind the desk, a window looked out over what had once been formal gardens. Snow covered everything now, smoothing the edge of neglect, but the underlying structure remained, pathways radiating from a central fountain, now cracked and dry, with stone figures half buried in drifts. Beyond that, the forest closed in tight, a wall of white-dusted pines that seemed to be slowly reclaiming the cleared land. Mason turned at the sound of Scout's low growl. The dog stood rigid, staring toward the doorway at the far end of the hall. Mason raised his flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark. Nothing moved, only the sway of a loose curtain in the draft from a broken window. "Easy, boy," he said softly, but Scout didn't relax. Mason crossed the hall and peered through the doorway. It led into what must have been the dining room once. A long table covered in a sheet of dust ran the length of it, empty chairs positioned around it like mourners at a funeral. Above, the ceiling sagged where snow and rain had eaten through the wood. On the far wall, faint handprints smeared in soot trailed toward the floor. Mason froze, pulse quickening. They were small, child-sized, and old enough that they left no clear outline, just shadows of fingers pressed against paint. His flashlight flickered, and he struck it against his palm twice. The beam steadied, and when it did, Scout was already beside him, teeth bared in a low, rumbling snarl. Mason scanned the room again. Nothing. No movement. No sound beyond the creaking of the house settling under its burden of snow and time. Only that smell, old wood, rust, and something metallic beneath it. Something that reminded him of field hospitals and medevac choppers. Mason exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the crawling sensation between his shoulder blades. "We're jumpy today, huh?" The words sounded hollow in the empty room. Too many ghosts, not enough sleep. He turned back toward the hallway, but every creak of the floor now sounded deliberate, and every draft that brushed the back of his neck felt too cold to be just air. Upstairs, the second floor waited like an unspoken dare. Mason hesitated at the base of the stairs, running a hand along the carved banister. Dust came away gray and soft on his fingers, but beneath it, he felt the faint ridges of initials carved into the wood. W.R. The letters seemed to burn into his vision. William Reed, his father's name. A tremor ran through him, subtle but unmistakable, the kind of bodily reaction that bypassed conscious thought. Dad? Though he knew how absurd it was, his father had never mentioned this place and had been dead for 27 years. The sound vanished into the emptiness, leaving only the echo of his own voice. He climbed the stairs anyway, each step protesting with a groan that seemed too human. The upper hallway stretched into shadow, lined with closed doors and broken picture frames. He pushed open the nearest door. The bedroom beyond still smelled faintly of cologne and mothballs. A cracked mirror hung crooked above a dresser, its silver backing peeling away at the edges. Mason caught his reflection in it. Tired eyes, weathered face, shoulders still carrying 20 years of sand and gunfire. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw someone standing behind him, broad-shouldered, uniformed, familiar. He spun around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. When he turned back, the mirror had cracked further, a thin line splitting his reflection from crown to chin. By midday, he'd managed to clear a small space in the main hall for their supplies. He found an old broom, swept away the worst of the debris, and opened a few windows to air out the musty smell that clung to everything. It wasn't much, but sunlight spilled through for the first time in years, cutting bright stripes across the marble and warming the air by a few precious degrees. Mason took his second cup of coffee outside to the front steps, needing to escape the oppressive feeling that had been growing inside him since finding those initials. From here, the valley stretched below, endless and quiet, a sea of white broken only by the dark lines of trees. The wind carried the scent of pine and cold stone. In the distance, he could hear the faint sound of an engine. Someone on the logging road, perhaps, though no one would be foolish enough to venture all the way up to the estate in these conditions. Scout sat beside him, gaze fixed on the tree line. His ears twitched, then flattened against his skull. "What is it, boy?" Mason asked, following the dog's line of sight. From deep within the forest came a sound, soft at first, almost like wind moving through branches, but it grew steadier, more deliberate, footsteps crunching through snow. Mason's muscles tightened automatically, body responding to potential threat before his mind had fully registered it. He stood, scanning the trees for movement. The steps stopped. The forest fell silent again. For a long while, neither man nor dog moved. Finally, Mason sat back down, exhaling slowly, his breath forming a cloud in the cold air. Probably just deer. Scout didn't seem convinced. His eyes never left the forest edge, his body tense as if prepared to launch into action at any moment. That night, as darkness reclaimed the valley, Mason lay awake on the cold marble floor. The storm had returned, snow whispering against the roof, steady and rhythmic. Somewhere a loose shutter banged in the wind, the sound just irregular enough to keep sleep at bay. Then, cutting through these familiar noises, came 3 slow knocks, echoing from deep within the house. Not loud, just enough to wake the part of Mason that never truly slept. He sat up instantly, pulse spiking. Scout growled low, the sound vibrating through the stillness. Mason grabbed his flashlight, sweeping it across the hall. Nothing, only shadows shifting in the unreliable beam. He waited, listening, every nerve alive with the hyper-awareness that combat had burned into him. Then came another sound, a faint metallic rattle from somewhere beneath the floorboards. Mason whispered, "You hear that?" Scout's answer was a quiet whine, head tilted toward the dining room. The tapping came again. 3 beats, then silence. Mason exhaled, slow and shaky. "Tomorrow we find out what's under there." Scout pressed close against his leg, steady and loyal. And as the night stretched on, the mansion seemed to settle around them like a creature watching its new occupants. Curious, patient, waiting for them to uncover what it had been hiding for decades. When morning came, it arrived cold and silver, the kind of dawn that barely warmed the skin. Mason woke to the drip of water leaking through a crack in the ceiling, the sound blending with the memory of those strange knocks, echoing faintly in his skull. For a moment, he wasn't sure if they'd been real or part of a dream. Scout nudged his shoulder, tail swishing once. His ears pricked forward, nose tilted toward the corner of the dining room where the noise had come from. "Yeah, I heard it too," Mason muttered, sitting up. His voice was rough from sleep and the dry, cold air. "Guess we've got a new project today." He started a small fire in the stone fireplace, feeding it with more broken furniture. The smoke curled up through the damaged chimney, carrying with it the smell of old varnish and decades of dust. The heat spread unevenly through the cavernous hall, but it was enough to thaw his fingers and bring feeling back to his feet. Scout sat by the fire for a while, then moved back toward that same spot by the dining table, sniffing the air and pawing at the floorboards. Mason followed him, flashlight in one hand, a rusted crowbar he'd found in a utility closet in the other. The floorboards there were warped and darker than the rest, as if water or time had stained them. He knelt down and tapped one with the handle of the crowbar. The sound came back hollow, with a resonance that suggested space beneath. "Well," he said quietly, "that's not nothing." He wedged the crowbar into the seam between two boards and pried. The wood lifted with a long groan of protesting nails, revealing a narrow cavity filled with dust and cobwebs. Something metallic glinted faintly in the beam of light. Mason brushed away the debris and froze. There was a small trap door reinforced with steel hinges, far too modern to belong to the original mansion. His pulse kicked up a notch. "Who the hell puts a hatch under the floor of a dining room?" Scout whined, tail stiff, pacing beside him. Mason tried the handle. It didn't move. Rust had sealed it shut, fusing metal to metal in a bond that had lasted decades. He went back to the utility closet and found a wrench among the abandoned tools, then worked the bolts loose one at a time, each turn accompanied by the screech of corroded metal. When the hatch finally gave, a gust of stale air rolled out, cold as a grave. Mason aimed the flashlight down. A short wooden ladder disappeared into darkness. Scout let out a low growl, the hair along his spine rising. Mason hesitated only a second, then started down. The steps creaked under his weight, threatening to give way, but they held. The smell down there was heavier. Mildew, metal, and something faintly chemical. The ladder ended in a small concrete chamber. Dust floated in the beam of light, dancing in currents of air that hadn't moved in years. The walls were lined with metal shelving, most of it empty now, but along the far side were several old crates, their wood swollen with age. One had burst open, revealing stacks of empty bullet casings and a few rotted canvas sacks. Mason crouched beside it and pulled it open further. Inside, wrapped in plastic that had gone yellow and brittle, was a thick folder marked with a faded stamp. U.S. Army, Operation Snowfall, 1982. His heart skipped. 1982, the year before he was born, the time when his father had still been an active service member. He opened the folder carefully. Most of the pages were water-stained and illegible, the ink long since blurred by moisture. But one photograph slipped free, preserved by its plastic sleeve. A group of men in uniform standing in front of a black military vehicle. Their faces were young, serious, proud, and one of them bore a nameplate that made Mason's throat tighten. Captain W. Reed. He stared at it for a long time, unable to breathe, unable to process what he was seeing. The face was unmistakable, even under the yellowed film of age. His father, William Reed, stood at the center of the group, looking straight at the camera with the steady gaze of a man who believed in what he was doing. "Dad," he whispered, the word barely audible even to himself. Scout had climbed halfway down the ladder, paws resting on the rungs, whining softly. Mason pressed a hand over his mouth, mind racing. His father had vanished when Mason was 9 years old. Official reports said killed in action during a classified mission. The body was never recovered, but rumors had circulated that Captain Reed had gone rogue, that he'd betrayed his country, that he'd sold military secrets. His medals were stripped posthumously, his name erased from records. It was the stain that had followed Mason through his own military career, the shadow he could never outrun. But now here was proof, tangible, undeniable proof. His father had been here in this house, and not just passing through, but as part of something called Operation Snowfall. Mason looked around the chamber again, seeing it with new eyes. The walls were reinforced with metal brackets, the ceiling cross-beamed with steel. Someone had built this room deliberately, not for storage, but for protection or containment. In one corner stood a rusted safe, its door slightly ajar. Mason wiped away the grime with his sleeve and pulled it open. Inside were old documents, a sidearm wrapped in cloth, and a smaller box no larger than a lunch tin. He lifted the tin out with shaking hands and flipped the latch. Inside lay a single folded piece of paper. The handwriting was shaky, the ink faded, but he could still make out the words. To whoever finds this place, we were never supposed to be here. If my son reads this, know that what they told you was a lie. I didn't run. The signature at the bottom was smudged, but it was there. Captain William Reed. Mason sank to the floor, the paper trembling in his hands. The weight of it pressed down like a mountain. For years, he had carried the shame of a name tarnished by rumor and official condemnation. Now that ghost spoke to him from beneath the earth, offering not answers, but the beginning of questions. Scout, his voice cracked. He didn't run. He didn't run. The dog whined again, tail sweeping the air as though to agree, to offer whatever comfort was possible in the face of a truth so long buried. A sound broke the silence, a faint creak above, like a door shifting on old hinges. Mason snapped his head up, flashlight darting to the ceiling. Dust fell from between the boards as something or someone moved across the floor above. He froze, listening. The footsteps stopped. Then after a long pause, the soft, hollow knock returned. 3 slow beats, only this time, it was coming from the other side of the concrete wall. Mason's pulse thundered in his ears. He shoved the paper and photograph into his jacket pocket and climbed the ladder fast, Scout backing away to give him room. He slammed the hatch shut and stood there, breathing hard, listening. The knocking stopped. The mansion was silent again, holding its secrets close. He checked the doors, the windows. Everything was still locked from the inside. The snow outside showed no fresh tracks beyond his own and Scout's. Whatever or whoever had made those sounds was already inside the house, hidden in its maze of rooms and secrets. For the rest of the day, Mason couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He found himself looking over his shoulder, scanning the tree line outside, listening for those faint metallic echoes. When night came again, he built a fire larger than before and sat beside it with Scout at his feet, the photograph and letter laid out beside them. His father's eyes stared back from the past, steady, proud, unafraid. "What were you doing here, Dad? What happened to you?" The only answer was the sound of wind slipping through the broken windows and the distant creak of the house shifting in its sleep. Scout rested his head on Mason's knee, sighing deeply as if to remind him that he wasn't alone. Not anymore. Above them, somewhere in the darkness of the upper floors, a floorboard groaned. Then another, slow and measured. Mason reached for the sidearm he'd found in the safe, checking to see if it was still operational. The mechanism was stiff but functional. He loaded it with rounds from his own supply, eyes locked on the stairs. Whatever secrets this house held, they weren't finished with him yet. He waited in the stillness, every muscle drawn tight, ready. The firelight flickered against the walls, throwing long, shivering shadows across the staircase. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, something small and quick, a trick of the light perhaps. But when he blinked, there was only the hollow emptiness of the hall. "Anybody up there?" he called, voice steady but low. It echoed up the stairs and died without an answer. Scout's growl was deep, barely audible, the kind that came from the back of his throat when instinct told him something wasn't right. Mason rose slowly, boots whispering against the cold marble. He swept the flashlight up the steps one rung at a time, the beam trembling slightly in his hand. Halfway up, he stopped. A door at the far end of the landing was open, a door he was sure he'd closed that afternoon during his exploration. He moved quietly, Scout pacing at his heel, nails clicking against the old floorboards. When they reached the doorway, the light revealed a small bedroom stripped bare, except for a single metal frame bed and an old dresser leaning to one side. Dust floated in the air like drifting snow. But on the bed, resting neatly in the center, was an envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with brittle wax, written across the front in careful block letters, "For my son." Mason's heart stumbled in his chest. His hand hovered over the envelope, fingers trembling. He looked around the room again, half expecting someone to step out of the shadows. Nothing moved, only the wind pushing faintly through the broken window pane, bringing with it a few stray snowflakes that melted as soon as they touched the floor. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened the envelope. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper, the kind torn from a military field notebook, written in his father's handwriting. Shaky, hurried, but unmistakable. "Mason, if you find this, it means I failed to fix what went wrong. I tried to stop them, but the corruption runs deeper than I thought. They made me the villain because the truth was too dangerous. Operation Snowfall wasn't about drugs or weapons trafficking, as the official record states. It was about money and power traded for human lives. I couldn't live with that. I couldn't be part of it. If you've inherited anything from me, it's stubbornness. That's good. You'll need it. But don't chase this unless you're ready to lose everything. They'll come for whoever touches this story. Trust your instincts, son. They'll serve you better than the men who wear badges. There's proof in the—" The letter ended abruptly. The final line was cut mid-sentence, the paper torn off. No signature, no clue where the rest might be. Mason exhaled hard, lowering the letter to his lap. His pulse was still hammering in his ears. There's proof in the— Where? The mansion? The basement? He looked around the room again, scanning for anything that didn't belong, anything that might complete the thought. Scout sniffed at the dresser and gave a sharp bark. "What is it, buddy?" Mason stood and opened the top drawer. It was empty except for dust and a small brass key taped to the underside of the drawer's lip. He peeled it loose. Stamped on the side was a single word: vault. He turned it over in his fingers. The edges were rough from age, worn by hands that had used it many times. A key meant a lock, and a lock meant something worth hiding. He pocketed it, folded the letter carefully, and looked out the cracked window. The sun had dipped behind the ridge, painting the valley in muted amber light. Down below, the iron gate was a skeleton silhouette against the snow. He thought of the rumors, the FBI raid, the disappearances, the silence that followed. Maybe the house wasn't haunted by ghosts, but by truth. That night, he sat near the fire again, reading the letters over and over, each word carving a little deeper into his consciousness. Scout rested beside him, eyes half closed in contentment. But every time the wind creaked through the rafters or snow slid from the roof, the dog's head snapped up, ears alert. Mason couldn't shake his father's warning. They'll come for whoever touches this story. His words seemed to echo off the walls, a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. Outside, headlights swept briefly across the trees, then vanished. Mason stiffened. The road beyond the gate was empty again, but his gut twisted with the certainty that they weren't alone on the mountain anymore. He doused the fire and stood in the dark, the sidearm heavy in his hand, listening. Only the faint hum of the wind through the pines answered him. He waited a full 10 minutes before breathing out. Paranoid, he muttered. That's what they'd say. But he'd learned long ago that paranoia kept soldiers alive. And right now, every instinct he had, the same instincts his father had told him to trust, was screaming that the shadows were watching, waiting for him to find whatever proof was hidden in the vault his father had mentioned. Tomorrow, he whispered to Scout, we find that vault, and whatever truth is locked inside it. Scout's amber eyes reflected the last embers of the fire, steady, trusting, ready for whatever came next. Mason patted his head, feeling the solid warmth of the one companion who had never doubted him, never left. Outside, snow began to fall again, erasing their tracks and covering the mansion in a fresh blanket of white. A clean slate, hiding the scars of the past beneath its pristine surface. But some secrets couldn't stay buried forever. And Mason Rita had finally found the one worth digging for. The truth about his father, about Operation Snowfall, and about the ghosts that had haunted both their lives for far too long. Dawn arrived with flurries that danced like ghosts against the rising sun. Mason woke gasping, trapped in the space between nightmare and memory, Afghanistan collapsing into the walls of the mansion, his father's voice merging with his sergeant's final orders. The letter had triggered something primal, a wound that had never properly closed. Scout nudged him back to reality, paw pressing insistently against his chest. Mason's hands trembled as he reached for the dog's fur, anchoring himself in the present. Sweat cooled rapidly on his skin despite the biting cold of the room. The PTSD episode had hit harder than usual, summoning demons both old and new. Explosions in distant mountains blended with the knocking from deep in the house, faces of fallen comrades superimposed over his father's photograph. The world beyond the broken windows had transformed overnight. Snow lay 3 feet deep now, perfect and untouched except for a single trail of footprints leading from the tree line to the mansion's east side. Mason followed them with his gaze until they disappeared around a corner of the building. Not animal tracks, human. Recent enough that snow hadn't filled them yet. Mason pulled his father's letters from his jacket, spreading them on the sleeping bag. The yellowed paper seemed more fragile in daylight, the handwriting less certain. Whoever had made those footprints might be coming for these very documents. His father's warning echoed in his mind. They'll come for whoever touches this story. He folded the papers carefully and tucked them inside his boot, beneath the insole, the safest place he could think of. The brass key marked vault went into an inner pocket close to his skin. Reading his father's words had unlocked something deeper than memory, a sense that his entire life had been built on quicksand. Every military commendation he'd earned seemed hollow now, shadowed by suspicion from superior officers who'd heard the whispers about William Reed's supposed betrayal. He'd fought twice as hard for half the recognition, carrying a name tainted by accusations that might have been fabricated. The ache in his chest intensified. Not physical pain, something raw. Truth hurt worse than lies ever could. Scout paced near the window, hackles rising as he stared toward the tree line. His growl vibrated through the stillness, low and urgent. Mason joined him, scanning the edge of the forest where pines sagged beneath their burden of snow. A shadow moved between the trees, then vanished. Too purposeful to be an animal, too furtive to be a hiker. He hadn't imagined the headlights last night. Someone was watching the mansion. Mason's stomach tightened with hunger, reminding him of more immediate concerns. Their supplies were dwindling faster than planned. The road down the mountain would soon become impassable if the snow continued. They needed to gather information and resources before becoming completely stranded. He checked the sidearm recovered from the safe, tucking it into his waistband before covering it with his jacket. Better to be armed in this isolation, especially now that he knew they weren't alone on the mountain. The truck started reluctantly, engine protesting against the cold. Mason maneuvered carefully down the snow-covered driveway, the tires crunching through fresh powder. Scout sat alert in the passenger seat, eyes scanning the white landscape as it crawled past. The journey into town took twice as long as it had 2 days earlier, the Forest Service road now a treacherous ribbon of ice beneath pristine snow. By the time Mason reached Pinecrest, his knuckles were white from gripping the wheel, shoulders aching with tension. Main Street appeared frozen in time. Buildings huddled against the cold, smoke rising from chimneys and vertical columns that disappeared into low clouds. The diner's neon sign flickered weakly against the white backdrop, promising warmth he desperately needed. Inside, conversations faltered as he entered. The patrons, mostly loggers and locals, sized him up with quick, assessing glances before returning to their meals. Mason felt the weight of their curiosity as he slid into a booth near the window, where he could watch Scout in the truck and keep an eye on the street. The gray-haired waitress appeared with coffee without being asked, recognition flickering in her eyes. "So, you survived the Blackwood place after all? Most folks bet you'd be gone by morning." Her voice carried just enough that nearby diners turned to look again, this time with more interest. Mason wrapped cold fingers around the mug. "Place needs work, but it's solid enough." A man in the next booth turned, cap pulled low over weathered features. "Military folks always think they can fix what's broken." His voice carried decades of cigarettes and hard living. "My brother worked security there, back when the government still admitted they owned it. Never came home one night. Official story was he walked off the job, but Jimmy never walked away from a paycheck in his life." Mason felt the room's attention shift, a current of unspoken history circulating with the steam from coffee cups and the smell of frying bacon. Tell me about the military connection. I heard rumors. The diner grew quieter, conversations pausing like a collective held breath. The waitress's hand stilled as she poured his coffee, eyes darting toward the street. The older man's mouth tightened beneath his gray mustache. Government ran some kind of research facility there in the 80s. Real hush-hush. Then one night, lot of vehicles up that mountain. Gunfire. Next day, place was abandoned. They said it was a drug bust gone wrong, but the bell above the door chimed as a woman entered, bringing a swirl of snow and cold air. The atmosphere in the diner changed instantly, conversations resuming too loudly, eyes averted. She moved with purpose, scanning the room until she spotted Mason. Her approach was direct, boots leaving melting snow on the worn linoleum. Dark hair framed an olive-complexioned face marked by intelligence and something harder, determination or perhaps anger buried beneath professional composure. Mason Reed, we need to talk about Blackwood Estate. Her voice was low but carried authority, the kind that expected compliance rather than requested it. Mason assessed her quickly, mid-40s, expensive hiking boots beneath practical winter clothing. No visible weapon, but carrying herself with the awareness of someone familiar with them. Not local law enforcement or county official, something else entirely. The waitress moved away, suddenly occupied with wiping already clean counters. The man in the next booth hunched deeper over his coffee. Whatever this woman represented, it commanded respect or fear, maybe both. Outside, Scout watched through the truck window, ears forward, completely focused on the newcomer. Privacy is hard to find in small towns, but we need it. The woman glanced meaningfully at the eavesdroppers. My car's outside. 5 minutes of your time might save your life. The walk to her vehicle passed in silence, their boots crunching through fresh snow that had already filled their tracks from minutes before. Scout barked from the truck, sensing tension. Mason signaled to him to stay, a command the dog acknowledged with reluctant stillness. The woman's SUV was parked on a side street, engine still running, heater fighting against the bitter cold. Government plates, not local. She slid into the driver's seat while Mason took the passenger side, leaving the door slightly ajar. Old habits of ensuring escape routes died hard. Dr. Elena Cortez, I was a military psychologist for the VA until 3 years ago. Her identification appeared in her hand, legitimate looking, but not current. Now I work independently with veterans suffering from combat-related PTSD. The revelation landed with weight. Mason kept his expression neutral, though his pulse quickened. I didn't ask for therapy. Beneath her professional demeanor, something shifted, a crack in the facade revealing deeper emotion. This isn't about your trauma, Captain Reed. It's about your father's. The words hit like a physical blow. How did you? Her eyes met his directly, unflinching. I was assigned to evaluate soldiers who served under Operation Snowfall. Your father was one of them. Before she could continue, her gaze shifted to something beyond his shoulder. Whatever she saw caused her expression to harden. We're being watched. 2 men in a black pickup at the corner. Military contractors, most likely. Mason didn't turn to look. How long have they been tracking you? Since I started asking questions about Blackwood and the children. Her words tumbled out faster now, urgency breaking through composure. Listen carefully. I lost my license for trying to report ethical violations related to Snowfall. Your father wasn't a traitor. He was trying to expose what they were doing. Those files you found? They're just the surface. There's more hidden in the estate, enough evidence to bring down people still in power today. Mason's mind raced, connecting fragments like a combat assessment. What were they doing to children? Elena's face tightened with something beyond professional concern, personal anguish. Experimenting with trauma responses. Conditioning techniques developed on war orphans, then applied to soldiers. Your father discovered it and diverted funds to help the subjects escape. That's why they silenced him. The black pickup had started moving slowly down the street toward them. Elena reached across to push open his door wider. Go back to the estate. Search the east wing. There's a hidden testing facility behind the library wall. I'll meet you there tonight. I have more documentation, audio recordings of sessions. Together with what you found, it might be enough. Mason stepped out into the snow, questions burning on his tongue. How do you know there's more at the estate? Lena's answer came as she pulled the door shut. Because I was one of the children your father saved. The SUV pulled away, leaving Mason standing in swirling snow, watching taillights disappear around a corner. The black pickup followed at a distance, confirming her concerns about surveillance. He walked back to his truck, mind churning with new information that shifted his understanding of everything: his father, his own childhood, even his military service. Scout greeted him with anxious whines, sensing his agitation. Mason scratched between the dog's ears automatically, his thoughts elsewhere, in hidden rooms where children screamed while men in uniforms took notes. In the final moments of his father's life, alone and branded a traitor for trying to save innocent lives. At the general store, Mason purchased supplies methodically: canned food, batteries, ammunition for the handgun, medical supplies. The clerk watched with growing curiosity as the pile grew. Planning to wait out the winter up there? The question carried false casualness, fishing for gossip to share later. Mason paid in cash the last of his money except for a few dollars held in reserve, just being prepared. Roads might not stay open. The clerk leaned closer, dropping his voice. They say that house changes people, makes them see things, makes them hear voices from the walls. Mason gathered his supplies without responding. Let it change me, then. I've been looking for something worth hearing for a long time. The drive back up this mountain grew more treacherous with it each mile, fresh snow erasing the morning's tracks. The truck fishtailed on curves, the chains on the tires barely maintaining traction. Mason drove with the focused precision of someone accustomed to navigating hazardous terrain, but his mind worked at a different problem, assessing Elena Cortez's credibility, her motivations, the risk of trusting her. A military psychologist who lost everything for speaking out. A woman who claimed connection to his father's final mission. A stranger who knew secrets about the estate that no outsider should possess. Could he trust her? The tactical part of his mind cataloged the risks. The part of him that had trusted his father's integrity for years, despite official condemnation, urged him forward. As the mansion appeared through curtains of falling snow, Mason noticed fresh tracks in the driveway, small footprints approaching the front door, then retreating back toward the forest. Too small for an adult. A child had been here while he was gone. Scout barked sharply, nose pressed against the window. Mason parked and released him, watching as the dog bounded through deep snow toward the tree line, following the mysterious tracks. Wait, Scout! The dog disappeared into the pines, snow swallowing the sound of his movement. Mason followed, struggling through drifts that reached mid-thigh. The tracks led to a clearing where a young girl stood waiting, seemingly untroubled by the cold despite her inadequate jacket. She watched Mason's approach with open curiosity, no fear in her expression, despite being alone in the forest with a strange man and his military dog. Scout circled the child, sniffing cautiously but showing none of his usual wariness toward strangers. The girl reached out fearlessly to stroke his head, earning an immediate tail wag that surprised Mason. Scout rarely trusted so quickly. You're living in the scary house now. The child's voice rang clear in the frozen air, matter of fact rather than accusatory. I saw your lights last night. Grandma Martha says no one ever stays there. Mason kept a respectful distance, crouching to appear less threatening. Who's Grandma Martha? She lives down the mountain. She makes the best cookies. The girl pointed vaguely toward a trail Mason hadn't noticed before. I'm Lily. I'm 8. That's Scout, isn't it? He looks like the boss in my soldier book. Mason nodded, studying her more carefully, dark braids escaping a worn knit cap, intelligent eyes that seemed older than her years, clothes that had seen better days but were clean and well-maintained. Does your grandmother know you're up here alone, Lily? The girl shrugged, attention fixed on Scout. I come here a lot. There was an old man in your house before. I saw him through the window sometimes, but Grandma didn't believe me. She said it was empty. Something cold that had nothing to do with the temperature settled in Mason's stomach. When did you see this man? Last winter. He had white hair and wore a uniform like in my books. Lily bent to scoop up snow, packing it between mittened hands. He waved to me once, but when I told Grandma, she got scared and made me promise not to come back. I promised, but I still do. Mason's mind raced. The timeline was wrong. The estate had supposedly been abandoned for decades, yet this child claimed to have seen someone there just last year, someone in uniform. Would you recognize this man if you saw a picture? Mason pulled the photograph from his pocket, the one showing his father with the other soldiers. Lily studied it, snow forgotten in her hand. That's him, the one in the middle. She pointed directly at William Reed. He looked sad when I saw him. Impossible. William Reed had been declared dead 27 years ago when Mason was 9. This child couldn't have seen him last winter. Yet there was no deception in her clear gaze. No sign she was making up stories for attention. Before Mason could question her further, a voice called from deeper in the forest. A woman emerged from between the snow-laden branches, alarm transforming to relief when she saw Lily. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her weathered face marked by lines that spoke of outdoor living and hard work. Lily Walker, I've been looking everywhere for you. Her stern tone softened when she spotted Mason. You must be the new owner. Martha Sullivan. I live a couple miles down the service road. The older woman's eyes widened slightly as she took in Mason's features, recognition flashing across her face. My lord, you're the spitting image of him. Mason tensed. You knew my father? Martha's gaze darted to Lily, then back to Mason. This isn't the place for that conversation. There's another storm coming. She gestured toward the darkening sky. You should get back inside before it hits. Stop by my place tomorrow if you want to talk about William Reed. Might be some things you ought to know. She took Lily's hand, tugging gently. Come on, child. Let's get you warmed up. The girl pulled away, reaching into her pocket. Wait, I found something you might need. She held out a small object that glinted in the fading light. An antique key with an ornate head. I found it in the snow by your gate. It looks important. Mason accepted it, turning the key over in his gloved hand. The metal was tarnished but intact. The design unlike any modern key, perhaps as old as the mansion itself. Thank you, Lily. The child beamed, pleased with her contribution. Will you look for ghosts in there? That's what the big kids say it has. Mason tucked the key into his pocket alongside the vault key. If I find any, I'll let you know. Martha's expression hardened. You won't find ghosts, Mr. Reed. Just old sins nobody wants to remember. She pulled Lily along more insistently this time. The child waved over her shoulder as they disappeared into the trees, leaving Mason and Scout alone with questions that multiplied by the hour. The wind picked up as they returned to the mansion, driving snow sideways in stinging sheets. The temperature was dropping rapidly, the storm Martha had predicted rolling in with greater force than forecast. By nightfall, they would be completely isolated, the roads impassable. Inside, Mason unloaded his supplies while scanning for any signs of disturbance during his absence. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the air felt different somehow, disturbed, as if someone had moved through the rooms recently. The east wing that Elena had mentioned beckoned, but daylight was fading fast. Better to search with proper light and preparation. He built a fire larger than before, creating a base camp in the grand hall with clear lines of sight to all entrances. As darkness fell, the wind howled through broken windows, driving snow through gaps in the boards. Mason used what he could find to reinforce the weakest points. Old furniture, pieces of fallen plaster, even books from the library, creating a shelter within the shelter. Scout's behavior had changed since their encounter with Lily. The dog seemed more alert, head turning toward empty doorways, ear pricked at sounds Mason couldn't hear. Twice he growled at the staircase, though nothing visible moved there. Mason spread the photograph and letters on the floor before him, along with the 2 keys, the brass one marked Vault and Lily's antique discovery. Elena's revelations about Operation Snowfall played in his mind on repeat, filling gaps in the puzzle while creating new questions. Experiments on children. His father's intervention. A cover-up that had spanned decades and claimed lives. What had William Reed discovered that was worth dying for? And why, after all these years, had Mason been drawn to this place just as others were circling back to it? The old grandfather clock in the hallway, long silent, suddenly ticked once, loudly enough to make both man and dog jump. Scout's growl vibrated through the dim light as the minute hand moved forward a single position, then stopped again. Mason stared at it, pulse racing. The mechanism should have been frozen with age and disuse, yet for one moment it had stirred to life. A noise from the eastern wing drew his attention, soft footsteps, too deliberate to be settling timber or falling snow. Mason reached for the sidearm, rising slowly to his feet. Scout moved beside him, body tense, ready to spring. They advanced through connecting rooms, passing the dining area where they discovered the trapdoor, continuing past the kitchen with its ancient appliances frozen in time, until they reached a corridor Mason hadn't fully explored. Ahead, a door stood ajar, spilling faint light into the hallway, light that shouldn't exist in a house without electricity. Mason approached cautiously, weapon raised. The doorway opened into a library that might once have been magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls, many books still in place despite decades of abandonment. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, and in front of it, unbelievably, stood Elena Cortez, warming her hands over a small fire she'd built in the grate. "I told you I'd meet you tonight." Her voice carried easily across the space, calm, despite the gun pointed in her direction. "I have access to the estate through passages the military created. There's a network of them throughout the mountain, emergency evacuation routes that were never on the official blueprints." Mason lowered the weapon slowly, wariness still evident in his stance. "You could have mentioned that before I nearly shot you." Elena turned to face him fully, firelight throwing her features into sharp relief. "Trust is earned, Captain Reed. I needed to see what you'd do with the information I gave you, whether you'd run or dig deeper." Scout approached her cautiously, sniffing her boots and clothing before apparently deciding she posed no threat. He settled near the fire, though his attention remained fixed on the newcomer. Mason gestured toward her backpack, resting against an armchair that had somehow survived the years intact. "You mentioned documentation." Elena nodded, kneeling to unzip the bag. Inside were folders, similar to those Mason had found in the hidden basement, along with a digital recorder and several flash drives. "I've been collecting evidence for years, testimonies from survivors, medical records that were supposed to have been destroyed, financial trails showing where the money went after your father diverted it." She spread the documents on a dusty table, organizing them with practiced efficiency. The experiments started as standard PTSD research, studying trauma responses to develop better treatments for veterans. But General Blackwood saw military applications. If they could understand how trauma affected the brain, they could weaponize it, create soldiers who were either immune to trauma or who could be controlled through it. Mason scanned the pages as she talked. Clinical reports detailing procedures performed on subjects identified only by numbers, psychological evaluations noting progress in conditioning responses, photographs of laboratory setups that looked more like torture chambers than medical facilities. His stomach churned at the clinical detachment evident in every document. They needed subjects who wouldn't be missed. Elena's voice had gone flat, professional distance barely masking old pain. Refugees from war zones, orphaned children whose paperwork could be easily falsified. "I was 10 when they brought me here. My parents had been killed in a border conflict. Your father was different from the others. He asked questions. He saw us as children, not test subjects." A distant booming echoed through the mansion. Not thunder, but the sound of the front door being forced open. Scout leapt to his feet, hackles raised. Elena moved with surprising speed, gathering the most important documents and shoving them back into her pack. "They found me faster than I expected. Someone in town must have reported seeing us together." Her voice remained steady despite the urgency of her movements. "There's a hidden room behind the north bookcase, part of the original testing facility. We can access it through here." Mason could hear multiple sets of footsteps now, moving methodically through the grand hall. Heavy boots, professional movements, not local law enforcement or curious teenagers. Military precision. Elena pressed against a section of bookshelf that looked identical to the others. A mechanism clicked softly, and the entire section swung inward, revealing a narrow passage beyond. She slipped through, gesturing for Mason to follow. "Bring only what matters. We have seconds, not minutes." Mason grabbed his father's letters and the photograph, along with both keys. Scout followed without hesitation as Elena pulled the bookcase closed behind them, sealing them in darkness, broken only by the beam of Elena's flashlight. The passage smelled of damp concrete and something chemical beneath it, institutional disinfectant that had somehow lingered through decades of abandonment. They moved quickly through the narrow corridor, Mason's shoulders nearly brushing both walls. Elena navigated with the confidence of someone who had walked these paths before. making turns without hesitation. Behind them, muffled by thick walls, came the sounds of the intruders searching the mansion. Doors being opened, furniture overturned. How did you know about these passages? Mason kept his voice low, though the concrete would likely muffle it from those searching above. Elena paused at a junction where the corridor split in three directions. I spent 6 months here as a subject. Later, when I became a psychologist, I specialized in treating survivors of government experiments. Many of them were from Snowfall. Through their fragmented memories and my own, I pieced together the layout. She chose the rightmost passage, which sloped gently downward. This leads to what they called the primary testing area. It's where the most severe conditioning took place. The evidence your father gathered was hidden there. Documentation too damaging to destroy, but too dangerous to leave where others might find it. The passage ended at a heavy steel door with a numeric keypad beside it. The electronics should have failed decades ago, but when Elena pressed a sequence of numbers, a light flickered from red to green. The mechanism had been maintained. The vault had backup power, isolated from the main systems, designed to last for years. She pushed the door open to reveal a room that looked frozen in time, clinical and sterile despite years of abandonment. Metal examination tables stood in neat rows, restraints still attached to their edges. Monitoring equipment lined one wall, screens dark but preserved under plastic covers. Filing cabinets stood against another wall, locked with heavy padlocks. Mason stared at the room, mind superimposing images of children strapped to those tables, screaming while men in lab coats observed and recorded. The thought sent a surge of nausea through him, followed by white-hot anger. These children, they were experimented on right here, while the world knew nothing? Elena moved to one of the filing cabinets, removing a small tool from her pack to work on the lock. Not just experimented on, programmed. The goal was to create perfect operatives, people who could be triggered to perform missions without conscious knowledge, then reset to normal function afterward. Manchurian candidates, but with much more sophisticated methods than the crude approaches of the Cold War era. The lock clicked open, and Elena pulled out a thick file. Your father discovered that Blackwood was selling the research, not just using it for American military purposes, but providing the techniques to private military contractors who would work for anyone with enough money. That's when he started smuggling children out and diverting funds to help them disappear. Scout growled suddenly, hackles rising as he stared at the door they'd entered through. Footsteps echoed in the passage. The intruders had found the hidden entrance. Elena shoved the file into Mason's hands, her expression urgent. There's another way out through the surgical suite. Take this. It's everything your father compiled, plus my own research. Names, dates, financial records. Enough to expose everyone involved, including those still in power today. She pressed a flash drive into his palm. If I don't make it out, find Michael Winters at the Pinecrest Gazette. He's been investigating Blackwood for years, but never had enough proof. Mason gripped her arm. I'm not leaving you here. Elena's eyes softened briefly, then hardened with resolve. I've been running from this for 30 years, Captain. Maybe it's time to stop. She nodded toward a door at the far end of the room. That tunnel leads to an exit near the north fence. Keep Scout quiet. Sound travels in these passages. Before Mason could protest further, the steel door began to open. Elena shoved him toward the escape route, then moved to position herself behind equipment, drawing a small pistol from her pack. I'll buy you time. Mason hesitated for a split second, combat instincts warring with the need to protect the evidence. The mission had to come first. His father had understood that, had died for it. Now the same choice faced him. He slipped through the door with Scout, pulling it nearly closed but leaving a crack through which he could see and hear. 3 men entered the laboratory, weapons drawn, not military uniforms, but the unmistakable bearing and equipment of private contractors. Their leader scanned the room, eyes passing over Elena's hiding place. We know you're in here, Dr. Cortez. This can go easily or very badly for you. The man's voice carried the flat affect of someone who had done this many times before, someone who viewed violence as simply another tool. Elena stepped out slowly, hands raised, pistol nowhere in sight. She had concealed it somewhere during those brief seconds. Gentlemen, I was wondering how long it would take you to find this place. Her voice betrayed no fear, only a weary resignation. The leader gestured to one of his men, who moved forward to secure her. "Where are the files? And where is Captain Reed?" Elena smiled faintly. "Reed left hours ago with everything I gave him. By now it's probably reached the press. You're too late." The leader's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted subtly, tension replacing certainty. "You're lying. We've had the house surrounded, no one left. Then you have incompetent men." Elena's smile widened slightly. "William Reed outsmarted Blackwood 30 years ago. Did you really think his son would be any less resourceful?" Mason watched through the crack as the leader considered this, weighing possibilities against risks. The mention of his father's name, so casual, so deliberate, was clearly meant for him. Elena was creating a distraction, crafting a narrative that might send them searching in the wrong direction. "Search the tunnels." The leader's order sent the other two men hurrying back the way they had come. "Find Reed, retrieve the documents. Blackwood wants this contained by morning." When they were gone, the leader turned back to Elena, all pretense of professionalism vanishing. "You've been a problem for a long time, Doctor. Blackwood thought you might eventually lead us to Reed, so he let you keep digging. But your usefulness has ended." He raised his weapon, and in that instant, Elena moved with unexpected speed, drawing her concealed pistol. Two shots rang out simultaneously, the sounds magnified in the concrete chamber. The leader stumbled backward, a red stain spreading across his chest. Elena fell to one knee, one hand pressed against her side where blood seeped between her fingers. Their eyes met in a moment of mutual surprise. Neither had expected the other to be so quick, so accurate. Mason burst through the door, weapon raised, but it was already over. The leader collapsed, weapon clattering to the floor. Elena looked up, pain etching lines around her mouth, but determination still burning in her eyes. "I told you to go." Her voice was strained but steady. "The others will be back when they hear the shots." Mason holstered his weapon and knelt beside her, examining the wound. Through and through, lower right side. Missing vital organs, but bleeding heavily. "You need medical attention." Elena pressed the flash drive more firmly into his hand, closing his fingers around it. "What I need is for this to reach the right people. Promise me you'll finish what your father started." The sound of running footsteps echoed from the passage, the other men returning. Mason helped Elena to her feet, supporting her weight as they moved toward the escape tunnel. Scout led the way, nose to the ground, moving silently despite the urgency. The tunnel was narrower than the first, forcing them to move in single file. Elena's breathing grew more labored with each step, her hand pressed firmly against the wound to slow the bleeding. Mason could hear shouts behind them, the pursuers discovering their fallen leader and organizing a search. The passage seemed endless, curving and branching, Elena directing them with increasingly faint instructions. "Left here, right at the junction, straight past the storage room." After what felt like hours but could only have been minutes, they reached another steel door. This one simpler, with a manual release rather than electronic locks. Mason pushed it open to reveal snow-covered ground and pine trees. They had emerged on the north side of the property, beyond the fence line, exactly as Elena had promised. The storm had intensified, visibility reduced to mere feet, the wind howling through the trees. Perfect cover for escape, but dangerous in its own right. Hypothermia would claim them as surely as bullets if they couldn't find shelter soon. Elena stumbled as they emerged into the snow, her strength flagging. Mason caught her before she fell, gathering her against his side. "We need to keep moving. There's a hunting cabin about half a mile north. I spotted it during my drive up the mountain." Scout forged ahead, creating a path through the deep snow. Mason half-carried Elena, watching as her blood left a trail of scarlet droplets against the white. A trail their pursuers could follow if they emerged from the tunnel soon enough. The wind would cover it eventually, but not quickly enough. Elena seemed to read his thoughts. "Go, leave me here. I'll hide in the trees. Buy you more time." Mason tightened his grip on her, something fierce and protective surging through him. "Not happening. I didn't leave men behind in Afghanistan, and I'm not starting now." She laughed weakly, the sound turning into a pained cough. "I'm not one of your soldiers, Captain." Mason adjusted his hold, taking more of her weight as they pushed through a particularly deep drift. "No, you're the woman who risked everything to clear my father's name." That makes you family. The cabin appeared through the swirling snow, a simple structure built for hunters, its windows dark, but its walls promising shelter from the storm and their pursuers. Mason broke the simple lock with one powerful kick, helping Elena inside before securing the door behind them. The interior was basic but sufficient. A wood stove, bunks built into the wall, a small table with chairs, and cupboards that might contain supplies. Scout shook off snow, circling the perimeter of the single room before settling near the door, alert for danger. Mason eased Elena onto one of the bunks, then quickly searched the cupboards. He found basic medical supplies, emergency rations, and, most valuable of all, a battery-powered radio. The cabin's owner had prepared for exactly this kind of emergency. He returned to Elena, cutting away the fabric around her wound with a hunting knife from his pack. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped, the edges of the wound already showing signs of inflammation. Using the supplies from the cabin and his own field medical training, he cleaned and bandaged the injury as best he could. Elena watched his efficient movements through half-closed eyes. "You've done this before." Mason secured the bandage with medical tape. Too many times. He checked her pulse, rapid but steady. The bullet hadn't hit anything immediately life-threatening, but she needed antibiotics and proper medical care soon. Outside, the storm continued to rage, snow piling against the cabin's walls, wind finding every crack and crevice. The temperature inside was dropping rapidly. Mason moved to the wood stove, finding it already stocked with split logs and kindling. Within minutes, a small fire had caught, beginning the slow process of warming the space. Elena shifted on the bunk, trying to see out the window. Did we lose them? Mason checked the perimeter, peering through frost-covered glass. The storm had obliterated their tracks, and no flashlight beams cut through the darkness. For now, the storm's our best protection. They won't risk losing more men in these conditions. He returned to her side, spreading an emergency blanket from the cabin's supplies over her. Your team planning was solid. Military background before psychology. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Child of revolutionaries. I learned strategy before I learned to read. When your government brings you to a black site, you pay attention to exits. The fire's warmth began to fill the small space, bringing feeling back to numbed extremities and a hint of color to Elena's pale face. Mason sat beside the bunk, processing the events of the past hours. You said my father saved you. What happened? Elena's gaze drifted to the ceiling, eyes focusing on something beyond the rough-hewn beams. I was test subject 17. Your father was supervising a session when I had a severe reaction to one of their conditioning techniques, nearly died. Instead of recording the results and continuing with the next subject, he stopped everything, administered emergency medical care. Then that night, he came back, disconnected the monitoring equipment, and carried me out through the same tunnels we use today. She shifted, wincing at the pain the movement caused. He took 12 of us over a 3-month period, set up new identities, placed us with foster families who didn't ask questions, funded our educations through shell companies. I became a psychologist to understand what had been done to us and to help the others who weren't rescued. Mason absorbed this, seeing his father in a completely new light, not just a soldier who had refused to participate in something unethical, but a man who had actively worked against it, risking everything to save innocent lives. I always believed he was innocent, but I never knew what really happened. Elena's hand found his, her grip surprisingly strong despite her weakness. He was a hero, Mason, but the kind the government doesn't put on posters or give medals to, the kind they bury and hope everyone forgets. Scout suddenly tensed, ears swiveling toward the door. A low growl rumbled in his chest, warning of approach. Mason moved immediately, dousing the lamp, checking that the door was securely barricaded. He peered through a crack in the shutters, searching for movement in them in the swirling snow. 3 figures emerged from the white void, moving with tactical precision despite the storm. The remaining members of the team that had invaded the mansion, plus reinforcements. They had found the tunnel exit and somehow tracked them to the cabin despite the weather. Mason reached for his weapon, mind calculating angles, cover, escape routes. The odds weren't good. 3 trained operatives against 1 man protecting an injured woman. Elena struggled to sit up, reaching for her own pistol. I can still shoot. Mason gently pushed her back down. You've done your part. This is mine." His voice carried the calm certainty of a soldier who had faced worse odds and survived. "Stay low. Stay quiet. No matter what happens, the evidence reaches Michael Winters. Promise me." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The same words she had spoken to him hours earlier, roles now reversed. Elena nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the moment. "I promise." Outside, the operatives had split up, surrounding the cabin. Through the snow, Mason could make out hand signals as they coordinated their approach. They would breach simultaneously, front and rear entrances, plus likely a third through a window. Standard tactical entry for a structure this bandipandum. Scout positioned himself near the door, muscles coiled tight, waiting for command. Mason moved to the center of the room using the table for cover, angles calculated for maximum effectiveness. They had seconds, not minutes. The first impact shook the door in its frame, a battering ram or heavily booted foot. Mason steadied his breathing, mind clear despite the danger. He had survived ambushes in mountains far more remote than this, against enemies far more numerous. The door splintered inward in a shower of wood and snow. Scout launched forward in the same instant, a blur of fur and focused aggression, targeting the first man through the breach. The operative's shout of surprise turned to pain as powerful jaws clamped onto his weapon arm. Mason fired twice, precise shots that dropped the second attacker before he cleared the threshold. The third man dove for cover, returning fire that splintered wood inches from Mason's head. Scout yelped suddenly, releasing his hold on the first attacker, body twisting as a bullet found its mark. "No!" Mason's shout tore from his throat as he saw Scout stumble. Red blooming across white fur, rage replaced tactical calculation, pure burning fury that narrowed his vision to the man who had shot his dog. He vaulted the table, firing as he moved, catching the operative with a shot to the chest that sent him sprawling backward into the snow. The first attacker had regained his feet, weapon rising despite the mangled arm. Mason redirected his momentum, driving into the man with his full weight, both crashing through the doorway into the storm outside. They rolled in the snow, grappling for control of the weapon between them. The operative was trained, skilled, but Mason fought with the desperate intensity of someone who had just watched his closest companion fall. His elbow connected with the man's throat, crushing his windpipe. The struggle ended abruptly, the operative going limp beneath him. Mason scrambled back to the cabin, heart pounding not from exertion, but from fear of what he would find. Scout lay on his side near the door, breathing ragged, blood staining the wooden floor beneath him. Elena had managed to drag herself from the bunk, pressing a bandage against the dog's wound with her good arm. "He's alive." The bullet went through his shoulder, missed vital organs. Her medical assessment was rapid, professional despite her own injury. "But he needs care soon, same as me." Mason knelt beside Scout, running a gentle hand over the dog's head. The amber eyes opened at his touch, recognition and trust still evident despite the pain. "Hang on, buddy. I've got you. We're getting out of this together." He gathered Scout carefully in his arms, the dog's weight substantial but manageable. Elena struggled to her feet, using the wall for support, determination written in every line of her body. "I can walk. The evidence is safe." Mason nodded toward his pack where he had secured the files and flash drive. "But we need to move now. Those three weren't alone. There will be others, and the shots will have given away our position." Elena nodded grimly, checking the ammunition in her pistol before following Mason out into the storm. The snow had finally begun to ease, the wind dying down to occasional gusts. In the east, the faintest lightening of the sky suggested dawn was approaching. Mason oriented himself quickly, identifying the direction that would take them down the mountain Mazarn, away from the estate and the men who sought to protect its secrets. Scout whimpered softly in his arms, blood seeping through makeshift bandages. Elena moved with surprising strength for someone with a gunshot wound, determination overriding pain. Together, they forged a path through snow that had drifted waist-high in places, each step taking them further from the nightmare buried in Blackwood Estate, closer to the truth that William Reed had died trying to expose. The evidence pressed against Mason's chest, safeguarded beside his heart. Proof of atrocities committed in the name of national security, of children's sacrifice for military advancement, of his father's final acts of courage. Whatever came next, Whether they reached safety or were caught in the net closing around them, that truth would finally see daylight. Behind them, the storm clouds were breaking, revealing a sky painted in shades of crimson and gold. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, the long fight to bring justice to those who had escaped it for decades. But for the first time since returning from Afghanistan, Mason Reed walked with absolute clarity of purpose. His father's mission was now his own. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor strokes of pink and gold as Mason stumbled through the diminishing snowdrifts, Scout's weight growing heavier in his arms with each labored step. The German shepherd's breathing had grown shallow, his fur matted with blood despite the makeshift pressure bandage. Behind them, Elena struggled to maintain pace, one hand pressed against her own wound, determination etched in the hard line of her jaw. They had evaded their pursuers for now, the storm providing cover as they navigated the treacherous descent down the mountain. But the snow was relenting, and with clearer skies would come renewed danger. Blackwood's men wouldn't abandon the hunt, not with so much at stake. The main road appeared through a break in the pines, its surface transformed into a ribbon of untouched white stretching toward the valley below. Mason paused, adjusting his grip on Scout, the dog's blood seeping through his jacket, warm against the frozen landscape. "We need transportation and medical attention. Soon." Elena leaned against a tree trunk, face alarmingly pale in the strengthening light. Her clinical detachment had slipped, pain evident in every line of her body. "Martha Sullivan, the woman you met yesterday, she's our best chance, isolated enough to be safe, close enough to reach." Mason nodded, calculating distances against Scout's fading strength. The dog had saved them both, taken a bullet meant for Elena. The thought of losing him sent a surge of desperate energy through Mason's exhausted muscles. He won't die. Not like this. Not for their secrets. They followed a narrow trail that branched from the main road, a path Mason wouldn't have noticed without Elena's guidance. The pines thinned, revealing a small cabin nestled against the mountainside, weathered but well-maintained, smoke curling from a stone chimney. A haven in the wilderness. Martha appeared on the porch before they reached the clearing, rifle cradled in experienced hands, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She lowered the weapon as recognition dawned, quickly assessing their condition with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to emergencies. Inside. Now. "Lily, get my kit." The cabin's interior welcomed them with warmth and the scent of coffee brewing on a cast-iron stove. Mason laid Scout gently on a quilt-covered table that Martha quickly cleared, his hands lingering in the dog's fur, reluctant to break contact. The dog's eyes flickered open, recognition and trust evident despite his pain. Lily emerged from a back room, arms laden with medical supplies, her expression solemn beyond her 8 years. The child moved with purpose, setting items beside Scout without being told. Gauze, antiseptic, suture kit. She'd done this before. Martha examined the wound with practiced efficiency, cutting away matted fur. GSW. Clean through and through, significant blood loss but missed major vessels. She worked as she spoke, hands never hesitating. The bullet channeled through muscle, missed bone. "He's strong, he might make it." Mason finally registered the woman's expertise. "You were a combat medic." Martha didn't look up from her task. "Vietnam, 2 tours. Now pass me those forceps and make yourself useful." For the next hour, the cabin became a field hospital. Mason assisted Martha, following her curt instructions as she cleaned, stitched, and bandaged Scout's wound. Elena sat nearby, allowing Lily to help clean her own injury, the child's small hands surprisingly competent with bandages and antiseptic. When Scout was stabilized, Martha turned her attention to Elena, examining the bullet wound with the same professional detachment. "Your field dressing was decent, kept you from bleeding out, but you need antibiotics and proper suturing." While Martha worked on Elena, Lily approached Mason, offering a steaming mug of coffee, her eyes wide with unspoken questions. "You've been in the scary house. Did you find the secrets?" Mason accepted the coffee, the warmth seeping into his frozen hands. "I found some. I think there are more." The child nodded solemnly, as if confirming something she already knew. "The old man, the one in the uniform, he talked to me once, told me to remember where the angels lost their faces. I didn't understand until I saw them in the snow." Mason stilled, coffee forgotten. When did he tell you this? Last winter, before he disappeared. Lily's voice dropped to a whisper. He said if a soldier came looking like him, I should show the angels. No one else. Martha finished binding Elena's wound, her hands slowing as she caught the child's words. She turned, eyes narrowing. What angels is she talking about? Mason remembered the glimpse he'd caught on his first day at the estate. Stone statues in the overgrown garden, their features worn smooth by decades of weather. Lily, what did you see in the snow? Lily's face brightened with the pleasure of holding knowledge adults needed. In the garden, when snow melts a little, then freezes again, you can see things underneath. The angels have a special place where they keep treasures. I found the key there. The key. Mason pulled Lily's discovery from his pocket, the antique key she'd given him in the forest. What else did the man in uniform tell you? Lily glanced at her grandmother, who nodded permission to continue. He said his son would come someday to finish his work, that the snow would show the way when it was time. He looked sad, like he wanted to go home but couldn't. Elena pushed herself to sitting position despite Martha's protests. Did he tell you his name? Lily shook her head. But I heard Grandma talking on the phone about Captain Reed being back on the mountain. I thought that was his name. Martha's face tightened, decades-old grief surfacing in the lines around her eyes. William Reed disappeared in 1998, not 27 years ago like the official story claims. My husband was security at Blackwood Estate when it was reopened briefly under a different name. He and Bill became friends. When the operation was suddenly shut down, my Jimmy vanished too. No explanation, no body, just gone. Mason struggled to process this revelation. His father had supposedly died when Mason was 9, 1998, aligned with that timeline. But the official story claimed a mission overseas, not a mountain facility in Oregon. My mother was told he died in a classified operation, that he betrayed his country. Martha's bitter laugh held no humor. Classified is right. Your father discovered Blackwood was restarting the experiments. Different facility, same abuses. He came back to stop it, and it cost him everything, including you. Outside, wind stirred the pines, sending snow cascading from laden branches. The day had brightened, sunlight glittering off the frozen landscape. With clear weather came increased danger, helicopter surveillance, reinforcements, a tightening net. Elena checked her weapon, military efficiency in her movements despite her injury. Blackwood's reach extends to local law enforcement, possibly state police. We can't stay here long. We're putting Martha and Lily at risk. Martha loaded shells into her shotgun, the mechanism sliding home with practiced ease. Let them come. I've been waiting 25 years to look those bastards in the eye. Mason moved to the window, scanning the surrounding forest for movement. The immediate threat demanded attention, but Lily's words tugged at his thoughts. The angels with lost faces. A message from his father preserved through a child's memory, waiting for the right moment. For him. Scout whined softly from the table, attempting to lift his head. Mason returned to his side, gently restraining him. Easy, boy. You've done enough. Rest now. Martha approached, checking Scout's bandages. He needs at least 24 hours before moving. The question is whether we have that long. As if answering her, the distant sound of rotors cut through the mountain silence. A helicopter approaching from the south. Mason's military experience identified it immediately. Black Hawk. Fast approach, low altitude. They're not even pretending to be civilians anymore. Elena moved with sudden urgency, gathering the files and flash drive. If they've escalated to military resources, Blackwood must be desperate. The evidence must be more damaging than I realized. Mason reached a decision, the tactical part of his brain calculating risks against possibilities. I need to go back to the estate, to the garden with the stone angels. There's something there my father wanted me to find, the final piece. Elena shook her head, incredulity breaking through her composure. You'll be walking into a trap. The entire mountain is probably crawling with Blackwood's men by now. That's exactly why I need to go. They're searching for us, for these documents. He tapped the flash drive. No one will expect me to return to the estate. It's the last place they'll look. The helicopter sound grew louder, circling somewhere to the east. Martha made a quick decision, reaching for her coat. Lily, take them to the root cellar. Now. The child moved without question, lifting a woven rug to reveal a trap door. Martha's voice softened as she addressed Mason. If you're going back up that mountain, you'll need help. Wait for nightfall. I'll create a distraction to pull their attention south. Before Mason could protest, the woman was out the door, shotgun in hand. Lily tugged at his sleeve, urgency in her small face. Hurry, Grandma knows what she's doing. The root cellar was cool and dark, shelves lined with preserved food and emergency supplies. Mason carefully carried Scout down the narrow stairs, settling him on a pallet in the corner. The dog's eyes tracked his movements, aware despite the pain. Elena followed, easing herself onto a wooden bench, her professional facade cracking to reveal exhaustion beneath. Above them, the cabin door opened and closed. Martha speaking to someone, her voice carrying the right notes of confusion and concern. Male voices responded, official, demanding. The conversation continued for several minutes before footsteps retreated and an engine started, fading into distance. Lily appeared at the trapdoor sometime later, her face serious in the shaft of light. They're gone for now, looking for people heading down the mountain. Grandma told them she saw a truck earlier. As darkness claimed the mountain, Mason prepared to return to Blackwood Estate. He checked his weapon, packed minimal supplies, and studied a hand-drawn map Martha had created, showing lesser-known paths through the forest. Scout watched from his pallet, attempting to rise when Mason donned his jacket. Mason knelt beside him, gently preventing the movement. Not this time, partner. I need you to guard Elena and Lily. Scout's amber eyes held his, centuries of canine loyalty distilled into a single look. Mason buried his fingers in the thick fur behind the dog's ears. I'll be back, I promise. Elena approached, her movements stiff from pain and cold. Her voice lowered so Lily couldn't hear from the kitchen above. If you don't return by dawn, I'm taking the evidence to Michael Winters myself. Your father's name will be cleared, with or without whatever's hidden up there. Mason nodded, accepting both her decision and the unspoken implications. The mission outweighed any individual. His father had understood that principle, had lived, and likely died by it. Now it was Mason's turn to risk everything for truths buried beneath snow and secrecy. Martha provided final instructions as he prepared to leave, her detailed knowledge of the surrounding forest revealing years of careful observation. The garden is on the east side, partially collapsed from neglect. The angel statues formed a circle around a central fountain, Roman style with 4 seasonal figures. The north-facing angel held a scroll. That's where I'd look first. The mountain had transformed in darkness, the familiar made alien by night and new-fallen snow. Mason navigated using natural features rather than man-made trails, knowing the latter would be watched. The sky had cleared completely, stars emerging in brilliant clarity, the quarter moon providing just enough light to find purchase on the treacherous slope. Twice he froze as patrols passed nearby, men with night vision equipment and tactical gear far beyond standard security. Blackwood had deployed serious resources, military precision in their search pattern. Whatever lay hidden at the estate, it justified extreme measures to protect. The mansion appeared through the trees after midnight, its dark silhouette stark against the snow-covered clearing. Lights moved within, flashlights sweeping methodically through rooms, additional forces searching what they had already examined earlier. They were thorough, professional, and completely focused on the interior. No one was watching the garden. Mason circled wide, approaching from the eastern forest where overgrowth provided additional cover. The garden lay in ruins, years of neglect evident in crumbling stone paths and collapsed trellises. Snow had transformed the destruction into something eerily beautiful, softening harsh edges, creating abstract sculptures where ornamental plants had died and frozen. At the center stood what remained of the fountain Martha had described, a circular basin surrounding a pedestal where seasonal figures had once stood. Most had toppled or crumbled, but the northern angel remained, its features worn to anonymity by decades of weather, a stone scroll clutched in eroded hands. Mason approached carefully, testing each step to avoid noise. The angel's blank face watched his progress. Sentinel to secrets buried beneath snow and time, he examined the statue, brushing away accumulated snow, looking for anything unusual in its construction or position. Nothing revealed itself until he cleared snow from around the base. There, nearly invisible in the moonlight, a small recess had been carved into the pedestal. A keyhole, deliberately disguised as part of the decorative pattern. Mason removed Lily's key from his pocket, the antique metal gleaming dully as he fitted it into the opening. The mechanism resisted at first, decades of exposure having corroded its internal workings. Mason applied steady pressure, feeling something give way with a faint grinding sensation. The entire front section of the pedestal shifted slightly, revealing a hidden compartment within. The space contained a waterproof military document tube, the kind designed to protect critical intelligence in field conditions. Mason extracted it carefully, heart pounding with the certainty that he had found what his father had hidden, what powerful men had killed to keep concealed. The tube opened with a hiss of preserved air. Inside lay a thumb drive, technology that would have been cutting edge when his father disappeared in 1998, along with a handwritten letter in a sealed plastic bag and a small leather notebook. Mason unfolded the letter using his flashlight sparingly to read his father's final message. Mason, if you're writing this, you have unraveled enough of the truth to find your way here. What follows is the complete record of Project Snowfall, both the original operation and its resurrection in 1998. Names, dates, financial transactions, psychological profiles of children used as test subjects, everything needed to expose those responsible. I've hidden copies with 3 separate individuals to be released upon my disappearance or death. If you've made it this far, the others have likely been silenced or discredited. You're the fail-safe I pray I never need. The man behind it all, Victor Blackwood, was once my friend, my mentor. I trusted him. When I discovered the original Snowfall documents in 1982, I believed he was as horrified as I was, that he would help me shut it down. I was wrong. He was not just complicit, he was the architect. I managed to save 17 children before they discovered my involvement. Elena Cortez was one of them. Find her if she's still alive. She's been gathering evidence for years. Son, I wanted to come home to you. Every day away has been a knife in my heart. But if I returned, they would have used you to control me, possibly made you a subject in their program. My absence protected you more than my presence ever could. The hardest thing isn't dying for what you believe in. It's living apart from those you love to keep them safe. Complete what I started. Bring them to justice. Then live the life I couldn't, surrounded by peace, not war. All my love, always, Dad. Mason folded the letter carefully, securing it with the thumb drive and notebook inside his jacket. His father's final word burned through his chest, years of uncertainty and abandonment transformed by understanding. William Reed hadn't run from responsibility. He had embraced a harder path, sacrificing his family to protect them and the innocent children Blackwood had targeted. Movement near the mansion snapped Mason back to present danger. A convoy of vehicles had arrived, disgorging more personnel into the night. At the center of this activity, a silver-haired man emerged from a black SUV, his bearing unmistakably military despite civilian clothing. Even at a distance, authority radiated from his posture, the easy confidence of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. General Victor Blackwood had arrived personally to oversee the operation. The stakes had just increased exponentially. Mason retreated deeper into the overgrowth, calculating escape routes. With Blackwood on site, security would tighten further, making clean extraction nearly impossible. But the documents in his possession now represented the complete case against a powerful man who had spent decades burying his crimes. This evidence could not be lost again. A sharp crack echoed through the night, a branch breaking underfoot. Mason froze, weapon ready, scanning the darkness for the source. A figure emerged from between snow-laden pines, small, familiar. Lily. The child approached without fear, her breath clouding in the frigid air. She spoke before Mason could question her presence with him. Grandma sent me. They found Elena. You can't go back down. Mason's blood ran cold. How did they find the cellar? Lily's expression conveyed a child's understanding of adult betrayal. Someone told, a man from town who brings us supplies sometimes. He saw the doctor lady at our house. Mason processed this new threat assessment. If they had Elena, they knew everything. The documents, Martha's involvement, possibly even his current location. Where's Scout? And your grandmother? Lily's voice remained steady, though her eyes reflected fear beyond her years. Grandma said to tell you Scout got away when they came. He ran into the woods. She stayed to slow them down, told me to find you, said you'd know what to do next. The child shivered despite her heavy coat, the night's temperature dropping well below freezing. Mason made a swift decision. They'd be watching all roads down, but there might be another way out, through the tunnel system Elena had shown him. We need to get inside the mansion. Lily nodded, complete trust in her small face. I know a secret way. The old man showed me. She led him through the garden to what appeared to be a maintenance shed, half collapsed beneath snow and neglect. Inside, beneath rotted shelving, a trap door revealed a narrow shaft with metal rungs embedded in concrete, an emergency exit from the tunnel system, disguised as ordinary infrastructure. They descended into darkness, Mason first, testing each rung before allowing Lily to follow. The passage below extended in both directions, one leading toward the mansion, the other toward the mountainside. Lily pointed confidently. This way goes to the scary rooms. The other way goes to the road, far down the mountain. That's how he got out sometimes, to talk to me. Mason considered their options. Every tactical instinct urged retreat, secure the evidence, protect the child, complete the mission. But Elena remained captive, Martha too. And Scout was somewhere on the mountain, injured and alone in sub-zero temperatures. Some missions required advance, not retreat. The tunnel gradually sloped upward, concrete giving way to reinforced steel as they approached the mansion's foundation. Lily moved with surprising confidence through the darkness, having traversed these passages before with William Reed. At a junction, she pointed to faded markings on the wall, symbols that Mason recognized as standard military navigation coding, likely added during the facility's construction. The marking for exit pointed left, while primary containment indicated the right passage. Mason hesitated, torn between immediate escape and the possibility of rescuing Elena. The decision was made for him when sounds echoed from the left tunnel, voices and footsteps approaching from the exit route. They pressed themselves against the wall in the right passage, Mason positioning Lily behind him, weapon ready. The voices grew louder, two men discussing search patterns and reporting protocols. Standard security procedure, but their casual tone suggested routine rather than urgent pursuit. They hadn't detected the tunnel infiltration. After the patrol passed, Mason led Lily deeper into the facility, following the containment designation. If Elena had been captured, she would likely be held in a secure location for interrogation, possibly the same rooms where she had once been a test subject decades earlier. The passage opened into the laboratory they had discovered earlier, the primary testing area with its examination tables and monitoring equipment. Now the space buzzed with activity, temporary lighting installed, computer equipment set up on wheeled carts. This wasn't just a search operation, they were reactivating the facility. Mason and Lily remained hidden in the tunnel entrance, observing through the partially open door. Technicians in civilian clothing worked at computer stations, while armed personnel maintained perimeter security. At the center of this operation stood General Blackwood himself, silver-haired and distinguished, examining readouts with the focus of someone accustomed to processing critical intelligence. Elena sat handcuffed to a chair nearby, her posture deliberately relaxed despite her situation. No sign of fear or intimidation showed in her face as she watched Blackwood with clinical detachment, the psychiatrist analyzing her subject. Martha was nowhere visible, nor was Scout. Mason weighed options against dwindling time. Direct confrontation would be suicide given the number of armed personnel. But the evidence he carried needed to reach the public, and Elena possessed critical context for interpreting it. Without her testimony, Blackwood's lawyers could dismiss the documentation as fabricated or misinterpreted. A new voice joined the conversation in the lab, familiar, jarring in its unexpectedness. Lily stiffened beside him, recognition widening her eyes. The newcomer stepped into view, speaking deferentially to Blackwood. It was Martha's neighbor, the man Lily had mentioned, the informant who had betrayed them. His presence confirmed Mason's worst fears about compartmentalized intelligence. Blackwood had maintained surveillance on Martha for years, patiently waiting for William Reed's work to resurface. Elena's voice carried clearly through the partially open door. You've spent 25 years and millions of dollars burying Project Snowfall. What are you afraid of, General? That the public will learn you tortured children in service to your ambition? Blackwood's response held the weary patience of a man explaining obvious truths to lesser minds. What we did saved countless American lives. The conditioning techniques we perfected created operatives who could withstand any interrogation, any trauma. Yes, there were casualties. Every advancement has its cost. Elena's laugh held no humor. You're still justifying it. After all these years, those children weren't acceptable losses. They were human beings. William Reed understood that. That's why you had him killed. A subtle change crossed Blackwood's expression, something almost like regret, quickly masked by practiced control. Bill chose his path. I offered him partnership in something revolutionary. He chose betrayal instead. The general moved closer to Elena, lowering his voice. Where is his son? Where are the remaining documents? Elena maintained impressive composure, her psychiatric training evident in her controlled response. If Mason is half the man his father was, those documents are already beyond your reach. It's over, Victor. You've lost. Blackwood straightened, any hint of personal connection vanishing beneath professional detachment. Search the perimeter again. The son is still on the mountain. He wouldn't leave without attempting rescue. When you find him, use whatever force is necessary. The documents are the priority. Mason retreated deeper into the tunnel, pulling Lily with him. Their situation had deteriorated beyond tactical resolution. Even with his military training, the odds against multiple armed personnel were insurmountable. Yet retreat meant abandoning Elena and possibly Martha to Blackwood's retribution. A sound from deeper in the tunnel system froze them both. The click of nails against concrete, followed by labored breathing. Lily whispered first, hope brightening her voice. Scout? The German shepherd emerged from shadows, limping heavily, bandages soaked through with fresh blood and melted snow. He whined softly upon seeing Mason, tail offering a single weak wag of recognition. Despite grievous injury, the dog had somehow tracked them through the mountain tunnels, navigating by scent and instinct. Mason knelt, examining Scout's condition with mounting concern. The wound had reopened, blood loss evident in the dog's weakened state. Yet Scout pressed against his leg, gaze fixed on the laboratory door, determination evident in every line of his body. Even injured, he remained a soldier awaiting orders. Lily reached into her coat pocket, producing something that glinted in the dim light, a small device with a single button. The old man gave me this. Said if soldiers ever came back to the scary house, I should press it when they were all inside. It would help people know the truth. Mason took the device, recognition dawning immediately. A remote detonator, military grade, designed for precisely timed demolition charges. His father had prepared a failsafe, hidden in plain sight, entrusted to a child who would raise no suspicion. He examined the device carefully. If William Reed had planted explosives, they would be strategically placed to destroy evidence while minimizing structural damage to surrounding areas. A controlled demolition, not indiscriminate destruction. A plan formed with tactical precision. The charges would create chaos, triggering evacuation protocols. During the confusion, they could extract Elena and escape through the tunnel system. The evidence would remain secure, and Blackwood's operation would be exposed, literally and figuratively. Mason crouched to Lily's eye level. I need you to wait here with Scout. When you hear the loud noise, count slowly to 100, then go back the way we came. Follow the tunnel to the road. Can you do that? The child nodded solemnly, small hand already buried in Scout's fur. The dog whined, attempting to rise, unwilling to be separated from Mason again. Mason pressed his forehead briefly against Scout's, a soldier's farewell to his most loyal companion. Watch over her. That's your mission now. Mason moved silently through the laboratory's side entrance, using equipment carts for cover, advancing when attention focused elsewhere. The guards maintained outward-facing perimeter positions, their concern external threats rather than infiltration from within. A tactical error Blackwood would soon regret. Elena noticed him first, her expression unchanging, though her eyes tracked his movement. She shifted slightly in her chair, creating a distraction as a technician approached. Mason reached the control panel that managed the laboratory security systems, the same panel Elena had accessed during their previous visit. One by one, he disabled critical systems, automated locks, emergency communications, backup power. Each adjustment required precise timing between guard rotations, each success bringing him closer to Elena's position. Finally, he reached the darkened alcove behind her chair, close enough to murmur instructions while remaining concealed. When the charges detonate, head for the east tunnel. Lily is waiting with Scout. I'll cover your exit. Elena gave an imperceptible nod, tension visible only in her whitened knuckles. Whatever happens, the evidence reaches Michael Winters. Promise me. Mason pressed the remote detonator into her palm. This isn't just about exposing Blackwood anymore. It's about honoring everyone who fought against him. My father, your fellow test subjects, Martha. I'll get you out or die trying. He moved toward Blackwood next, drawing his weapon as he emerged from cover. The general's eyes widened briefly, not fear, but something closer to recognition. The resemblance between father and son momentarily disorienting him. In that moment of hesitation, Mason activated the detonator. The explosion came not from planted charges, but from Scout, the dog launching himself through the laboratory entrance in a blur of fur and desperate loyalty, directly at the armed guard nearest Elena. The distraction created instant chaos, guards swiveling toward the unexpected threat, weapons raised. No, Mason's shout tore from his throat as Scout collided with the guard, jaws clamping around the man's weapon arm. The soldier screamed, trying to dislodge the dog while maintaining control of his firearm. A shot rang out, then another, wild, panicked. Mason used the chaos to reach Elena, cutting her restraints with his combat knife. Blackwood barked orders, attempting to regain control of the situation as more guards poured into the room. Go! Now! Mason pushed Elena toward the tunnel entrance, turning back toward the melee where Scout fought with desperate, fading strength. Another shot cracked through the laboratory, finding its mark. Scout yelped, body twisting as a bullet tore through his chest. The dog stumbled, releasing his grip on the guard, blood spreading across white fur in a rapidly expanding stain. Rage replaced tactical calculation, pure, burning fury that narrowed Mason's vision to a single point. He fired twice, dropping the shooter where he stood, then charged forward to reach Scout. The dog lay motionless on the concrete floor, eyes fixed on Mason, unwavering loyalty evident even as life ebbed away. Mason gathered Scout into his arms, the dog's weight impossibly light now, as if what had made him substantial was already departing. He backed toward the tunnel entrance, using his body to shield the dying animal from further harm. Elena provided covering fire from the doorway, her aim precise despite her injury. Something shifted in Blackwood's expression as he watched Mason's retreat. Recognition, perhaps, of the same uncompromising loyalty that had defined William Reed. The general made no move to pursue immediately, holding his remaining men in position with a raised hand. There was no triumph in his face, only the weary acknowledgement of inevitable consequences finally catching up. Mason carried Scout through the tunnel system, the dog's breathing growing more labored with each step. Elena led them through junctions and hidden passages, eventually reaching Lily, who waited where instructed, tears streaming silently down her small face as she saw Scout's condition. Together they emerged from the mountain's secret passages onto a service road far below the estate, miles from the active search perimeter. Scout lay across Mason's lap in the cold moonlight, each breath a victory against encroaching stillness. Mason stroked the fur behind the dog's ears where he had always loved to be touched. Brave heart, loyal to the end. You saved us all. Scout's amber eyes found Mason's one last time. Recognition and trust evident despite the pain. His tail moved once, a final affirmation of unwavering devotion. Then stillness claimed him, the loyal heart finally at rest. Mason buried Scout at dawn on a rise overlooking the valley where morning light touched the stone first and lingered longest at day's end. Elena and Lily stood beside him as he placed the final stones on the grave, a soldier's tribute to the finest companion he had ever known. In the distance, sirens wailed, multiple agencies responding to the classified facility suddenly exposed to public view. Blackwood's carefully constructed secrecy was collapsing, the weight of decades of deception finally breaking through carefully maintained barriers. Lily placed wildflowers on Scout's grave, her small face solemn with understanding beyond her years. The old man said brave dogs go to a special place, where soldiers wait for them. Mason knelt beside her, finding unexpected comfort in the child's simple faith. I believe that too, and Scout was the bravest of them all. Elena approached, holding out her satellite phone. Michael Winters is waiting for your call. Everything we gathered, plus Scout's sacrifice, it's time the world knew. 1 year later, snow fell gently on the transformed Blackwood estate, now renamed Snowfall Haven. The mansion's scarred exterior had been repaired, windows replaced, grounds restored from decades of neglect. Where military secrets had once been buried, a facility of healing now stood, a rehabilitation center for veterans suffering from PTSD, combined with a rescue sanctuary for abandoned dogs. Mason stood on the front steps, watching as Lily played with a young German shepherd in the fresh snow, not a replacement for Scout, but a continuation of his legacy. The dog's enthusiastic barks echoed across the clearing, a sound of life and joy where silence had reigned for too long. Inside, Elena conducted therapy sessions in rooms once used for darker purposes, her psychological expertise now directed toward healing rather than exploitation. Her testimony, combined with William Reed's meticulous documentation, had brought down not just Blackwood, but an entire network of officials who had protected the illegal program for decades. Martha Sullivan had recovered from her injuries and now served as the facility's house manager, her practical efficiency transforming the mansion into a true haven. Her deep knowledge of the mountain and its seasons proved invaluable as they established the foundation that funded their work, named for William Reed and all who had fought to expose the truth. In what had once been the mansion's grand hall, Mason had created a memorial, photographs of his father alongside documents vindicating his actions, Scout's collar displayed in a place of honor, names of the children saved through Operation Snowfall Mercy. Not a monument to tragedy, but a testament to the courage of those who stood against injustice, regardless of the cost. The grandfather clock that had stood silent for decades now ticked steadily in the hallway, its mechanism restored, marking time in a house that had rejoined the world. Mason checked his watch. Nearly time for the evening group session, veterans gathering to share experiences and strategies, to remember they weren't alone in their struggles. He had found his purpose in the very place his father had lost his life, turning an instrument of trauma into a center for healing. The nightmares hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had changed. No longer was he trapped in Afghanistan's mountains with dying comrades. Instead, he sometimes dreamed of Scout running through endless snow, leading him toward a figure in the distance, a soldier waiting patiently for his son to complete the mission he had begun. Mason touched the frame that held his father's photograph, the elder Reed's eyes seeming to meet his across decades of separation. The hardest thing isn't dying for what you believe in, it's living for it every day when the battles never truly end. Outside, the new dog barked joyfully, Lily's laughter joining the sound. Mason turned toward the door, toward the present and future rather than the past. The mansion stood solid against winter's assault, no longer haunted by secrets, but animated by purpose. No longer a place of whispered legends, but a beacon for those still finding their way home from personal battlefields. Some wounds never fully healed, but they could become foundations for something stronger. Some ghosts never completely departed, but they could transform from haunting presences to guiding lights. Mason Reed had learned this truth on the mountain, paid for it with blood and loss, and now lived it every day among others walking similar paths. Evening settled over Snowfall Haven, lights glowing from windows that had been dark for decades. Inside, voices murmured in conversation, laughter occasionally breaking through. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the scars of the past beneath a clean white blanket, not erasing history, but offering the possibility of new tracks across unmarked terrain. Mason stepped back inside, closing the door against the cold. The warmth welcomed him, along with the knowledge that he had finally found what every soldier ultimately seeks. Not glory or victory, but simply a place worth coming home to.